Good evening and welcome to our first deep dive session. And I've got with me this evening 5 HCC guinea pigs who have volunteered or been volunteered to share with you this evening. So obviously there's Tim, we all know Tim. We've got Mike Sphere, we've got Karen Colley, we have got Kizzy, sorry Kizzy, I've forgotten your surname.
Kanu.
Thank you, Kizzy Kanu, and we have Catherine. And again, I've forgotten your surname as well, Catherine.
Right.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
Welcome all. We were starting on Sunday to talk about the 5 Ephesians giftings and callings. All of you have very kindly taken the free online survey and have got a sense of what your giftings are. And I'm going to ask in a minute for you to share those. Before we do that, there's just some slides I'd like to share. There we go. So we're obviously, tonight is the Power of 5 exploration of the Ephesians 4:11 functions, our deep dive. So we talk about these 5, and we obviously had our message on Sunday where we discussed those, but I just wanted to quickly recap for everyone. So apostolic, we're going to start there, and there's a reason why we start with the A, but apostolic, sending and extending. In Greek, it's the whole idea of being sent, the sent one, and as we said on Sunday, it's very much about being a representative, sometimes, of royalty. It's being sent on a mission. It's also a pioneering function within the church. It has that capacity to extend Christianity. It's usually somebody who wants to create a movement, somebody who's very entrepreneurial in their approach, someone who's pushing forward the boundaries. So it's about sending and extending. Then we have the prophetic, which is questioning and embodying function that's tasked mainly around faithfulness and making sure that people are hearing and listening to God. It can also be a calling out, a judgment, a speaking truth to power in very many cases. The evangelistic is about recruiting and connecting. Primarily, that's about the proclamation of God's word, bringing the good news to the church and beyond, and bringing people around into the gathering. Shepherding, developing and deepening relationships. That's that maintaining and developing healthy community and enriching relationships, both inside the church and outside the church in many cases. Defending the community, helping build that community. And finally, teaching is about training and contextualizing. That's probably the one that we all understand the most. It's the one we see most often in our churches, someone standing up, preaching from the word or teaching. But also it's about simplification, it's about systemization, it's about people making the complex easier to understand and helping people move forward in living the truth of God's word. So that's just really to remind us all of what we discussed. Now, I'm going to share where I am in all of these first, because I thought I'll be the guinea pig. So my first one is apostolic. Next, who would I like to share with it? Catherine, would you share your first one with us? Tell us what that is.
Well, my first one, we'll say, I got pastor, so shepherd. Yeah. And
now, Catherine, you're in two squares here. Let's just address that one. Would you like to explain to me why I've got you in shepherding, but I've also got you half in teaching?
Yeah, so I got teaching and shepherding exactly the same, like both my first, which was a surprise, I think. Yeah.
In what way was that a surprise for you?
So shepherding, I can sort of understand. I'm definitely more people focused, I would say. Like I love deep chats and things like that, and seeing people grow. Teaching was more of a surprise because I think I immediately assume a more of a leadership role, which I don't identify with. But also I think, yeah, I would second guess my knowledge, and I wouldn't think that I would like instinctually think to pass it on, maybe.
Okay, thank you. So Kizzy, would you like to share your first one with us, please?
Yeah, my first one is the same as Catherine's, it's pastoral. That's shepherding.
Shepherding, yeah.
Yeah.
Was that a surprise to you, or did that ring true?
When I did it last year, it surprised me. because the results are the same as what I got when I did the survey last year. It surprised me at the time, but with all the explanations that came with this survey this time and I read through, it doesn't surprise me at all, because I see myself sort of being that person who wants to be there for people, loyal, dependable. I will show up and I'll support you, I'll encourage. And yeah, so it doesn't surprise me at all. But I guess at first, last year, it was the name, the tag, pastor. Right. And pastor means head of a congregation, literally the way we see it play out. So I couldn't relate with it at the time. Yeah. But knowing that it's more of how you function and how you do day-to-day life and discipleship and how you actually serve both the congregation and people around you, it all makes sense now.
Good, well done. And you'll see that I've deliberately chosen not to use the words apostle, prophet, evangelist, pastor, shepherd, or teacher, because you're absolutely right. It's not about putting that tag, and it's much about how you operate and function. So well spotted. So Mike, would you like to share your first one with us, please?
Yeah, my first one was evangelistic, and that actually was no surprise because everybody tells me I'm an evangelist. I've always, since I came to know the Lord, I've wanted to share Him, and I don't have a specific "I'm going out to evangelize" attitude. It just happens. I speak with people, and God has answered some amazing prayers in my life, and I'm often able to share those. My eldest daughter had her head cut clean in half in a road traffic accident, was not meant to survive at all, lost a lot of her brain. And there's a story about how God answered my prayer with her. And once I was crashing in an aeroplane in France with no hope of survival. And Sue, who was in England, saw this picture of this plane crashing and prayed for me, and I was saved. And I find it easy to share testimonies.
Tell those stories. Well, I remember the first time you and I really met, Mike, that you were able just to, I got fully engaged in the stories you were telling, very much about your experience of God and what He's done in your life. So a real evangelistic movement in your life, because that ease with which you talk to people and can share. Now, Tim, sorry, I pressed the button too early, so yours has been exposed, your first one. But would you like to share with us what your first one is as well?
Yeah, so similar to yourself, Stephen, came out as my highest score was being apostolic, and I guess that does ring true in kind of lots of spheres, really. I think just the way that I think I just naturally, instinctively think advancement, development, growth, thinking kind of beyond the current. How can we begin to advance horizons? And I guess it's not just been in a church sphere, perhaps experiencing that, but I was also invited to be the chair of our football club. And of just one of my little sidelines is really enjoying growing, with Anya, growing our football club, or not ours, but this local football club, and just seeing that really grow and develop and advance, and developing people and structures and teams. And I guess you end up being who you are wherever you are, and it's just and I think that's an exciting thing. So yeah, so a lot of that kind of rung true, really, Stephen.
Great, thank you. Now, Karen, last but not least, what was your first one?
My first one was shepherding, which wasn't a surprise. I think people interest me. I think I'm concerned about people in, the roles that I perform in church, and also in work and all of that. I think I remember details about people. That's not a surprise at all.
So thank you all for sharing yours. I mean, just as we look at those, you can see we're well represented in the shepherding, with a touch into teaching. Tim and myself up there in the apostolic, and Mike in the evangelistic. We seem to be missing some prophetic in this group at the moment, but that's not to worry. as we look at those, any comments from any of you about either your own or when you look at other people's?
Yeah, Kizzy and Catherine, actually, having known you for a shorter time than I have perhaps Karen, that's really interesting to see that you both came out high on shepherding, and I just having got to know you, but I can really see that, and I think that, yeah, it's just really exciting, and can see that really playing out, which is great, and for others I can see naturally, yeah, that those functions and leanings being very much true of who you are.
Yeah, same. I think I can see, like, sort of knowing your, like, those characteristics. I think everyone seems to be quite, yeah. Well,
Okay, so what I'm going to now do is ask us to share our second ones, and I'll start with myself again. So the second one now, I'm not that I'm everything. I'm sort of stuck in the middle. I'm a bit like Catherine here. So I'm sort of almost equally split between teaching and prophetic. So that's why I've sort of stuck myself across there in the middle. Obviously, I do take a teaching role in life of HCC. A lot of what I've done in my job is very much around bringing clarity, systemizing things, producing stuff. But the prophetic as well, also, I probably, when I think of the prophetic, I don't see myself as a, in the Old Testament prophet type guys, but very much in the role I was doing previous to taking retirement was about calling out in business, the issues around how people were treated in our supply chain, how things were done. So being the whistleblower, being the person, again, who calls out the things that are wrong and need to be addressed, being sometimes, hopefully I'm always the critical friend rather than just critical, but so I do play that role as well. So I'm split halfway between. So if I could ask Catherine, we've already done you've got your two already. Is there anything you'd like to see on the teaching side? You commented on the shepherding side.
Yeah, just like I said, it was a surprise, and I'm surprised. Maybe I could have thought, shepherding would be up there, but I definitely wouldn't have thought that it was on par. But it's interesting. I'd like to look into it more. Yeah.
Good. Well, that's what this is about. And then,
Steve,
sorry, carry on.
Yeah, I was going to ask a question there, because it's something around like the teaching kind of function. Is some of that also to do with the way you think as a person and the way you analyze and process, and it brings out some of those strengths other than just the classic idea of, Catherine standing up with a Bible at the front of church, lecturing everybody?
Absolutely right. And you're absolutely right, Tim, there. And we'll come on to actually look at some of those characteristics in a moment once we've done this, because you're right. What we've got to avoid is putting the sort of the label that we always assume that just because you've got a teaching calling does not necessarily mean to say you'll be the one standing up front all the time. But there will be lots of ways that you will fulfill that role in terms of how you function, how you operate, how you think, and there certainly will be rules within the wider church that don't require you to stand up front, as it were. So yes, thank you for that, Tim. We will do that. So Kizzy, would you mind sharing your second one with us, please?
Yeah, my second one's teaching. Surprising, because the thing that comes to your mind is, say, standing in front of the church and teaching from the Bible, or even leading Bible studies or things like that. But again, having a look at my life, when I discover certain truths, I mean, I don't necessarily stand in front of the congregation or teach it to, one-on-one to people that don't know Jesus, but I do feel like sharing. And one of the ways I've seen it play out recently is with all that is going around on social media, and the gospel is people are trying to spin the gospel to suit their own narratives. And I'm usually the scroll past kind of person, but on this, I'm not scrolling past. I'm going to say in love, I've read that part of the Bible, and no, that's not the way it comes out. This is an interpretation. Right. And if you're willing to discuss it a bit further with me, would you please send a message to my DM? Right. So I do see that gifting comes to play in that sort of sense.
Great.
So as much as I don't have a stage, I really don't desire one. But I don't know. The Holy Spirit finds ways to lay on my heart to share.
Excellent. No, well
Share
done.
truth. Yeah.
And Mike, would you like to share your second one with us, please?
Yeah, my second one was teaching. As I've got older, I realise I know less than I thought I did. I guess in my younger days, I was very much involved in teaching from church. Not so much now. It did surprise me. I thought probably my second one would be apostolic, but yeah, it came out quite heavily to teaching.
Okay, great. And Tim, what was your second one?
Yes, my second one was that of the evangelist, actually. Yes. Yeah. Again, thinking, I guess, thinking very missionally and outwardly in the way, yeah, I think that's what gets me up in the morning to think, how can we communicate the good news of Christ? How can we be that good news, and drives everything that I seek to kind of, serve in and lead in. So that wasn't a total surprise. Followed very, very closely by the prophetic by one point, which would also resonate strongly with me. Yeah.
And then finally, Karen, what was your second one?
My second one was teaching, which wasn't a surprise since that's my job. So that's good that it's up there. But yeah, I think in my professional life, absolutely. In church life, I think I would be like Kizzy. I would not see myself as standing up at the front teaching in that way. But when you said contextualizing earlier, I thought, yeah, actually, that's a much more accurate, perhaps, aspect of teaching that I maybe engage with, insofar as it's applying God's truth to our lives now. So yeah, I can agree with that. Yeah, I have no problem with how I've come out as my top two sort of giftings, if you like, or at least. But yeah, I wouldn't see myself standing on a Sunday morning leading, teaching.
Okay, so it's really interesting. We've got five of us who've all got some foot in the teaching camp. Now, I've cleared this with Tim beforehand. Tim, would you like to tell us where teaching ended up in your
yes, but quite low, Stephen.
Oh.
Very low, in fact. I liked how you said earlier that the teaching gift really takes complexity and really simplifies it, and I think that's one of the things that I really appreciate being in team meetings, for example, with our small groups with Karen. She kind of really helps simplify things and ask the obvious to help us really kind of think. But I feel like I create more complexity than I do simplicity.
So that's the apostolic being active, lots of ideas. So given that obviously the role that you fulfill in the church and teaching is part of what you've got to do, or that you do, can you share with us some of the things you do to sort of stretch yourself in that space and make sure that you can? We're none of us sitting in one box at any one time. We've got to be able to flex between, and I think that's a great example. And then I will show something from me, so you're not the only one being put on the spot.
No, thank you, Sim. Yeah, there's probably two things. First of all, I think over the years I've just, and you've sat on enough annual reviews with me as well, Stephen, over the years, that I've come to accept my strengths and to know where those strengths are. And what I seek to do, and I still feel like this is an area to still grow in, is to be compensating and finding, empowering the teaching gifts to complement alongside my strengths, so that we can then begin to have the fully orbed expression within one community. And I think recognizing that's an area of my weakness is then being able to enable others that are strong in that teaching gift to really arise in those gifts that then really bring a really good synergy. So I think that that's been the first thing. I've spent so much time beating myself up that I'm not a good, a thoroughbred Bible teacher. But then I'll come and say, well, that's not necessarily how God's wired me. But it's not to say that's something I don't work at. And so I've spent a lot of time with people and learning from people how to communicate clearly, effectively, and to really grow in the skill of communication and explanation and expounding. And I think that's something that I hope I'm growing in. But at the same time, knowing that that's not necessarily my natural sweet spot. I think that just demonstrates really well how we can flow well together in team.
Absolutely. And now you've got 5 other people that you can see here.
I know.
You can easily call on to give advice and to sort of a bit of coaching. So that you weren't the only one. I agreed, Tim shared that I would share. So my lowest one is shepherding. And that, for those who know me well, that probably isn't a big surprise. I must admit that I'm a very task-focused individual. Big plans, so the apostolic is very strong. Sort of being very structured in my thinking. It's very easy for me to forget people or forget to take people into consideration when I'm, launching my big plans. Obviously, in my professional life, that wasn't an option. I had to be able to take people with me and to sort of think of the people. But what I cheekily did all the years is whenever I built my team around me, I always made sure I had a couple of managers who worked in my team, who worked with me, who were much more people focused than I am naturally. And actually having those individuals close to me, being able to call out to me when I was forgetting the people, being able to bring that to the table, a bit that you've just said, Tim, I found over the years that's what helped me work in that area, which I know to be very weak. And obviously, I've got a wife now who's very strong on the shepherding side, so she does give me a good old dig in the ribs occasionally to remind me to think about the people. Again, how we can work together and flow together on this. But now that I know that Catherine and Kizzy are in that box, there's somebody else, a couple of other people I can call on. Before we move on from this, is there anything anybody else would like to add or ask or say?
Yes, Stephen, just one point on what we've just been sharing. I think that's not to say that you don't care and have an interest and a love for people. It's just not maybe your initial instinct or go-to point. Yeah. And equally, just because I'm not massively strong on the teaching role doesn't mean I don't love the scripture and I'm passionate about the word of God, because I really am. But it's just, so I think there's stereotypes I think we're debunking all the way through this session, I think.
Absolutely right. I couldn't put it better myself, Tim, and I think that's for all of us to take away. And a few of us have mentioned that. It surprised us because we've had a preconceived idea in our heads. And what this is about is debunking those preconceptions. This is about a calling. So we'll come on to the next bit, which is very much looking at apostolic, we talked about, prophetic, we talked about, evangelistic, we talked about, shepherding, we talked about, and teaching, we talked about. And as I said to you, I've used specifically those words rather than the labels, because this is a way of operating, a way of being, a way of being called. Why have I highlighted the 5 letters in red? Well, that's because we're going to start talking about something called APEST, which is a label that Tim and I are aware of from other organizations who are using this. And it's just a shorthand. So increasingly you'll hear us use this shorthand, APEST. And all we mean are the 5. It just is easier to say than the 5. But I just wanted to share that with you and obviously with everyone in HCC. So this will make sense as we go forward in the next few weeks. So I'd like us now to spend a little time looking at these things. As we've already said, this is not about a label. It's very much about a way of operating, way of thinking, way of being. And I've just listed under the 5, and you can all see all the 5, yes? Yeah, so I've just listed, you might want to sort of look at the one that was your number one. And these are just some adjectives and that describe, I think, in a way what these roles are. I'd like to take some time just to look at that, and then we'll come back and we'll have a bit of a discussion on that. So we've got in front of us the 5, and we've got some adjectives and some descriptive words. So Tim, you and I fell into the apostolic.
Yeah.
Having seen that list there, anything jump out at you?
Yeah, well, I'm interested, the two of us looking at this together, actually, because I'll be interested to see some of the descriptives that you would resonate with, and perhaps ones that I would resonate with. So, for example, there I'd really resonate with the design-orientated, ideational, creative, adventurous, innovative, pattern-sensitive. That's an interesting one. I hadn't thought about that aspect. That's something I'd like to explore more. There's adapted, dynamic. Some strategic in there as well. But I was interested about what resonated with you out of that list, Stephen.
It's interesting, because for me, it's very much strategic, holistic. That's a future orientation. I don't often think of myself as creative or innovative, but I know I do enjoy creating new things and sort of seeing different ways and possibilities of doing things. Not on the same level, I suspect, that you are in terms of that creativity and design orientation. But that pattern sensitivity, I love to just make sense of what otherwise could be quite random and get it into some sort of order. So I think we're, looking at both of us together, you probably wouldn't have put us in the same area, but I think when you see the breadth of that.
Yes, and I think our two dynamics are actually quite complementive under that function.
No, I think you're right.
It's very interesting.
On the prophetic, I think you said you were quite close in the prophetic, and it was sort of a close call between my number 2's prophetic. The thing I get there is you look at that future present orientated, it ties across very closely with the apostolic, that what I call my wife would laugh at this bit, that contrarian, someone who always thinks about the different, the opposite way almost, and that challenging questioning, challenging the status quo, which I think is very much linked to the innovative in terms of seeing new ways of possibly doing things. So I think for me, the prophetic, that kind of makes sense. If we move on to the evangelistic, where we had Mike in the evangelistic box along with you, Tim. So Mike, when you see those words there, anything jump out at you?
Well, engaging is the beginning of a conversation with a stranger, and with me it is often storytelling, and it has to be very genuine, and it has to be because I love the person. There's no me telling them, and I will engage with them, and it's just what the Holy Spirit brings up in these situations, and I will then say, "Look, would you like me to tell you about this?" And they always say yes, and I say, "Well, look, at any point, just say you've had enough, and I will not be offended at all." And I will then share what God has done, and I've never had somebody say they've had enough.
And would you say
I just think that if people know that you are genuine and you are sharing Christ with them because you love them, they have all the time in the world for you.
Yeah,
it's wonderful.
Lovely, thank you.
Wow.
Under shepherding, we had quite a few of you in the shepherding box. I'm looking at the 3 ladies here particularly. So having seen that list there, anything that jumps out or makes a bit more sense, or you think is completely balmy?
I think it clarifies things for me in the sense of, I think I can identify with being empathetic, nurturing, caring, like very, people focused for sure. Yeah.
And does that play out, Catherine, in what you do for a job? Some of these things.
So in normal life, I'm an events coordinator, so very people focused, very need to engage with everyone and need to remember facts and people and faces and stuff. So I guess actually that does actually
very relational,
relate to my everyday life as well.
Is it from you?
Personal jumps out at me. It will apply to work as well, because say for patients, different needs, that you can't just tailor your care to be the same for everyone. Personally, I have to, read the mood, read the needs, and try to relate to this person according to their needs and at the level where they are. It plays out with work. It also plays out with my friends, okay? And patient, that doesn't, I don't know anyone that a patience comes to very naturally, but it's one that I've had to pray over and ask God for help, literally, to grow in, because being caring, being protective and nurturing in my friendships with family, I get to be sort of sometimes the reasonable head, right? And for you to be that, you have to be patient, because it will mean walking alongside people when they don't want to hear the truth, when they don't want to know, when they don't see your perspective as caring for them, but maybe being against them. You have to bear with that. You have to bear with their excesses. You also have to bear with their frustrations, knowing that at the point where they are, they don't actually see far beyond that. But when they get to see the truth, they realize you have their best interest at heart. So it's all about not taking it personally, but persevering and, you know, loving people at their most unlovable moments, basically.
Right. And then we'll jump to the last one then. Thank you, Kizzy. So teaching. So Karen, you were in the teaching box, and I think you as well, Catherine. Were you in the teaching box? Anybody else? I've forgotten now. But again, looking at those words, what jumps out? Does anything jump out?
Yeah, I think for me, reflective. I think that definitely in my professional life, but also I think in terms of my personal life and my life in church, I think that it's interesting to see that there. I think I am reflective, definitely, in terms of my being, and insightful, perhaps not so much. I don't know. I don't know that I would see myself as insightful, but rational, definitely. I think that's the other one. Definitely not really big on being emotional. We have we have that joke about me just being a flatliner in terms of emotion. But very interesting, the adjectives that are there that I wouldn't necessarily put in with teaching. So definitely worth more reflection.
Catherine, have you found that list helpful, coming from your starting point of not necessarily seeing yourself with that strength dynamic?
Yeah, sure. Like Karen said, there are things that I wouldn't have initially classed under teaching that I identify with. So, for example, I wouldn't claim to be, but I definitely would aspire to be insightful, analytical, and forensic. Knowledgeable. Again, I don't think I am, but I would, in the pursuit of knowledge. So yeah, definitely seeing this, I could identify a little bit more and see the leaning for that. Yeah.
Great. Well, look, I think that's been really great, guys, to hear that, and hopefully that'll get you thinking a bit more. And these slides will be available for everyone to look at, so spend some time thinking about what these mean for you. Now, just moving on again, what I've then done, if I can make this move, here we go. Just looked at the sorts of rules that, and we won't go through all of this, but I just thought, interestingly, the sorts of rules that would fit in, both in terms of what happens in the church, but also what happens elsewhere. And again, as we just look at these, and maybe look at the ones where you come out, does this resonate? And it might be what you're into, it might be what you do, it might be that you might want to change career paths. But the thing that struck me about the apostolic, from my perspective, problem solver, that is absolutely me. I'm always looking for a solution to a problem. Not always is the solution wanted, and sometimes Karen does remind me, I'm just telling you this, I don't need to solve this problem for me, I just feel I need to tell you this, so don't go solving it. But that's very much me, problem solving, systems thinker, paradigm shifter. I enjoy that side, and that makes sense to me. I don't see me as a networker per se, or a church planter, but definitely that organizational designer, really ties in with that with me. Tim, is there anything there for you?
Yeah, so it's interesting actually. Networker is something that I found really helpful in that, because I feel that that's something I instinctively do as a person. And if I'm in a crowd of people in a room, I just want to work the room and like network people in the room. And if so that's quite interesting.
And it's interesting, you're also strong on the evangelistic, which is also about networking. And
yes.
It's two slightly different types of networking. So in the evangelistic is exactly as you described, and it's exactly as Mike's described, that ability just to talk to a room, to talk to people, to just sort of be at ease. In the apostolic, it's that ability to network, sort of what you might call across a much wider area, transnational, translocal.
Yes, quite.
And being, because again, that apostolic needs to feel part of that much wider network. So it's a slightly different skill set, and obviously both work out for you. The evangelistic, Mike, have you thought about becoming going into marketing or journalism recently?
Well, I used to have a machinery company that exported machinery to France and Romania, but I was quite a good buyer, but not a very good seller.
A good negotiator, presumably, as well, then, because that comes up.
I guess the big thing that would describe me would be risk taker.
But you could make a deal as well, I guess.
Yeah.
And then in the shepherding, so we've got community worker, sort of caregivers. I imagine health worker. Kizzy, does that resonate?
I'm all smiles, like this is me. Yeah, health worker, and in just normal day-to-day life with friends, family, church, protector. I totally resonate with that, because in sharing my heart and sharing God's love with people, this is the truth. This will protect you. The other way, maybe not so much, but
I guess as a doctor, in the medical profession, I mean, being a warrior, as you say, fighting for the right thing for the patient, as you say, is that something that you see in yourself a lot?
Oh yeah. So I'm a radiographer, not a doctor.
Sorry.
But this particular one just calls to mind certain situations where, say for example, end of day, I'm supposed to go home, but something's come up in theaters. Who's gonna go? And everyone is saying, well, it's end of work, we're not going to go. Well, I'm going to go up there and help out and stay, say, an extra hour, because if, say, myself or my loved one ends up on the table tomorrow, I want there to be a radiographer that says, I'm going to stay extra to look after them, right? And I don't care. Good. I'm just going to go do it. So I've actually had situations like that, which is, it's not legally, it's the end of the day for me. I can choose not to do it, especially when it's things that have just come up spur of the moment. But that's where you need to step up in emergencies, isn't it?
That warrior spirit comes into play. And then finally we reach teaching. So obviously this one's easy for you, Karen. You are a teacher, but Catherine as well. You were strong in the teaching. Is there anything there that sort of strikes you as interesting or unusual?
What strikes me as unusual is I don't think I'd identify or like even consider in a career path many of the occupations, but the ones that are like researcher, philosopher, thinker, like I said before, I'm definitely into like learning, like the pursuit and stuff. So maybe in that sense I could identify with it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And Karen, obviously a teacher, but anything else in that list that you want to comment on?
No, I think because teaching and shepherding for me were quite close. I think, community worker, teaching certainly in these days takes in that sort of thing. These are both very people oriented, and I think that's absolutely who I am. That's where I feel comfortable.
Great.
I think lots of that. You know, I think in past roles, you know, when I would sit on personnel committees, you know, finance never interested me, but human resources, you know, it just did.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. Well, look, thank you. I thought we'd find that really interesting, and that really, I think, does get us to the end. I just wanted to come back to this slide to remind us of the APES, so Apostolic, Prophetic, Evangelistic, Shepherding and Teaching. I'd encourage us all to use the adjectives rather than the labels, because this is about more than being one of those things, and again helps us get away from that preconceived idea that we might have of some of these words in the past. So look, thanks guys for your time this evening. It's been really interesting. I think I found it really interesting talking to you about this. Hopefully you've found it interesting as well. Just in the last sort of few minutes that we're going to sort of wind up, it'd be great to hear from you how you found this experience, whether you'd encourage others to look at it, what you're going to take away from it. Mike, can I start with you perhaps?
Yeah, I would encourage everyone to do this survey. It's quite interesting. I think oftentimes we're not aware of the gifts that we have. And when I was doing the survey, the family were around and I was calling out the different things and they were saying, yeah, it's that, it's that. And I'm thinking, really? And anyway, because of the mismanagement on my part, perhaps, I did this survey 4 times. Off my results. And the last 2 times were actually almost identical. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And yeah, it just causes you to reflect and think and check yourself out a bit and bring it before God in prayer.
Yeah.
Because perhaps we're not using all our gifts, you know, and we could use more.
Thank you, Mike. Anybody else got anything they'd like to sort of say to that?
Yeah,
I think,
Mike.
oh, sorry, you go.
But yeah, definitely for me, because it's the first time I took this, and I definitely learned a bit about myself, I think, as well. And I also took it very literally at the start, but this has taught me, you know, don't box yourself in, really like look at how, so yeah, look at what you're prominent in, but also how is that affecting your other giftings, and sort of, because, you know, you're not just, oh, evangelistic, no, never.
Absolutely.
So yeah, and like Mike said, I'm definitely excited to look into it more and pray into it and see where it goes.
Great.
Yeah.
Anybody else? No? Well, look, thank you very much for your time.
Okay.
I would encourage you, all of you who are with us, all of you who are watching this, you know, that over the next few weeks, we'll be doing deep dives into each of the 5 APES giftings. You've heard how much these guys have got from that. And hopefully you too can get involved in it and get lots from it too. And it just remains for me to say thank you very much to all of my guests, and good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you all.